Hi, folks. Thanks so much for stopping in to watch this video about identity and loss. I'm Dr. Doug, and thank you again for stopping in. If you can, comment down below about what it was about this topic that made you stop, why you're interested in it, as well as any other topic ideas that you might have. For now, let us dig into identity and loss. I've had two incidents of major identity loss that I have had to deal with, and that immediately jumped to my mind when I was thinking about making this video. And there's been a couple of incidents that have happened over the last year that had also sort of made this idea salient to me, the idea of sort of losing a part of your identity and all of the things that happen afterwards. For me, maybe about 30, maybe about 30 years ago, I'm an avid runner now, but I used to be a really, really mega runner and was running a ton, always training for marathons, that sort of thing. And my knees just got to the point where they were really just totally destroyed and where it hurt to walk. So it was really impacting my functioning. And because of the nature of running is that your feet are in contact with the ground for a very short period of time versus walking. So because of that, it actually hurt me less to run than to walk. And which is not great because then I just continued running even though it hurt to walk. And of course, common sense, maturity, all of that stuff, like now would tell me that it's probably a bad idea to keep running at that level. However, back then, I just kept doing it. And so at some point, I sort of waved my flag that I just couldn't do it anymore. I could not run anymore, couldn't walk, and just had to sort of face that loss of that part of my identity, and was really, really depressed, really upset about it. And it was a huge part of my identity. And I remember going through periods of just like judging myself for being so emotionally impacted by this minor thing, and other people not really understanding how much of an impact that had on me also made me feel very alone. And third was sort of looking at other people who had it worse than me. Like I remember distinctly this one time when I was standing outside my apartment and this car pulled up with this family. Everybody started getting out. And this one gentleman in the car got out and went into a wheelchair and had a cast on his leg, had broken his leg. And I had thought, maybe I should feel thankful that I'm not dealing with a broken leg. And I just sort of thought to myself, like, nope, I'm not thankful. I really feel bad for myself that I can't run and that I'm in pain and that it hurts to walk. And I've lost this part of me, this part of my life. And that also brought up, of course, secondary self-judgment of like, oh, you can't even sort of recognize that other people are worse off than you. That's not quite true. I could recognize that, but it still didn't change my experience of the loss. Like just because other people may have situations that are much worse than mine, which I could fully recognize and acknowledge, it didn't mean that that loss meant any less to me because of the impact that it had on my life. And sort of learning over time that that is quite valid and really justified for you to be pretty upset about a major loss to your identity. Another incident, another event that happened in my life, which was a sort of a different angle, I guess, because it wasn't a thing I do that was part of my identity, but rather sort of a part of who I am. So several years ago, I was extremely sick and was very, very undernourished, which was sort of a secondary symptom of the medical emergency that I was going through. And as a result, my body started to just really break down. Like I had dry skin and my fingernails stopped growing, hair stopped growing, like all of that sort of thing. And probably the symptom or consequence that was the most upsetting for me was that I lost my hair, which really not that many people know. And I'll explain why people didn't know. But I had like very, very long hair, almost down to my waist, and had long hair for quite a while. And when it first started happening, for any of you who have had hair loss, you probably recognize these steps of sort of like, oh, maybe this is a normal level of hair loss. And you sort of tell your friends about it and they say, oh, everybody loses hair. Like I lose hair. I find hair in the drain all the time. You're just normal. And then you start to think that you see bald spots. And again, you ask your friends, and your friends reassure you, oh, no, that's totally normal. That's just the space between your hairs, which is true. There's space between your hairs. But, you are thinking like, oh, has it always been like this? Is this new? Why am I just noticing this now? And then at some point, it becomes very, very obvious that it is not your imagination, and nobody can deny it any longer, that you are definitely losing your hair. And, my clothes were, oh my gosh, it was like Naugahyde. My clothes were completely covered in hair constantly. And, my vacuum cleaners were being destroyed because I was losing so much hair. And at some point, I realized that this was severely impacting my self-confidence, my desire to be seen out in public, because I was really embarrassed by the way that I looked. And it wasn't necessarily that my hair looked really bad or that my head looked really bad, but because of the nature of what was going on, I no longer felt like a woman. I didn't think that I looked like a woman anymore. And I never realized before how important that part was to me, of this part of me that I just took for granted. And that was just always the way it was, that I looked like a woman. And when people would look at me out in the world, they would see a woman. And I just didn't know that that was so important. And that my hair played such a big part in that, I also had no idea. And so, I was sort of struggling with self-judgment again, of like, why does this matter so much? It shouldn't matter so much. And I know who I am. And like sort of all of that weird self-talk that we'll do with ourselves that is trying to downplay that loss, minimize or invalidate our experience of that loss, which, our brain just sort of jumps into that by habit. And at some point, I, with help of friends, support from other people, really accepted and embraced that this is just really important to me and is definitely a big piece of how I interact with the world, how I want to interact with the world, how I interact with me, even just when I look in the mirror. And so at that point, I started to wear a hairpiece. I actually had a whole collection of like partial wigs, and really nobody actually ever knew, other than the people that I specifically told. I got really beautiful hairpieces, and my hairstylist at the time did a wonderful job blending the color and all of this. And I felt great again. And they were just small periods or incidents where I'd be someplace really windy and it would make me very nervous that the entire piece would be lifted up and would reveal that it was not really my hair or wasn't really attached to my head. But other than that, what I found was that my self-confidence was restored, and I felt like I had sort of regained that part of my identity again. So, for you all are having your reactions to these stories, whatever reactions those might be, to the story about me not being able to run anymore, to the story about me losing my hair, which are two like very different experiences, but both hit me in very similar ways because they are such integral pieces of my identity. And for you all, maybe you think like, oh, well, that's not very important, or, oh, that would not have bothered me, or maybe the other way, that, oh gosh, that would have just destroyed me, something like that. And I hear this from clients, friends, and family quite often of they've had this major loss to some piece of their identity that they minimize, invalidate their experience, and it's just not helpful, really. And it happens to people for all different reasons why they do that. And part of it is, possibly trying to reassure yourself that this isn't such a big deal. Part of it may be like trying to preemptively invalidate that so that other people don't invalidate it, and sort of maybe your fear that others will invalidate your experience. Or there's just some habitual piece to it that you are just used to sort of downplaying or minimizing your experiences. And also like comparing yourself to other people, of other people have it so much worse, at least I'm not XYZ. And again, just like my experience, it just doesn't really matter what's going on for other people. What matters is the impact on me of this thing that has been taken away from me or that I've lost. And it doesn't actually matter what that thing is. I mean, it could have been a pen, it could have been a habit, a hobby, a type of food, a family member, whatever. It could be anything. The only thing that is really counts is what is the impact on you, and just sort of recognizing for yourself that this was a big piece of my identity. So, what do we do about that? First of all, if you have experienced a loss to some piece of your identity, the first thing to do that is really, really important is to honor and grieve that loss, of just like recognizing how important that thing was, how it was so ingrained into your identity, how it was so integrated into other parts of your identity, and that it was incredibly important to you. And maybe even going through with a timeline of like your relationship with that part. When did it start? When did it grow? When did it have challenges? What kinds of changes to that relationship with that part of yourself had you seen over the years? And this is all just part of grieving and honoring the importance of this piece of your identity. So that's number one. And before leaving number one, let me just say that this process of honoring and grieving, everybody has their own time scale for this. So for some folks, maybe you just do it for a couple of weeks. And for other people, maybe it is several months. And it is a very personal timeline. And so sort of not pressuring yourself to get it done in a few minutes or however long, but giving yourself the time and space you need in order to just really sit in it, acknowledge, honor, and grieve, and give it the respect that it deserves as a vital piece of your identity. So that's number one. Number two, this part is challenging, is to find meaning in that loss. Basically, if you sort of picture your life, if you mapped it out on a timeline, let's say there's like a line with ticks and you have this life, to not see this loss as like an asterisk, something that is an anomaly, that is not part of the timeline, that I've just sort of put off to the side. But instead, it's actually important to see how this loss fits in with the rest of you, the rest of your life, your identity. And how does this impact? How will this get integrated in? What are the ramifications? What are the meaning? Where does it come from? What is my experience with this sort of thing? So finding meaning in that, that could be, like let's say, even on the most superficial level, let's say you lose the ability to run like I had. Then maybe one of the meanings that I get out of that is, okay, I'm going to integrate this into my life, and I'm going to make sure that in the future, I have a more moderate approach to things that I love so that I don't basically burn it out, right? And that I take care of it and that I treasure it while I have it. So that's one way that loss actually took on meaning in my life. I guess that's not actually very superficial. At first it sounded superficial. It's not superficial. So that would be sort of one way. And losing my hair, that event, one of the ways that took on meaning was that really taught me sort of to honor my losses and to not minimize and invalidate my experiences. That whether it is important to someone else or not, that all that really matters is the impact that it has on me. And that was a huge contribution that loss had in my life. The third part is to restructure your identity. So you have the loss of this piece of your identity, and you have this new meaning that you have understood, comprehended, are beginning to integrate in. And now to restructure your identity. What does this mean? Am I saying that you're going to become a totally different person? No. Am I saying that you are reinventing yourself? No, I'm not saying that at all. What I'm saying is that when you first have a loss, the thing that happens to your identity is that you become a person who can't XYZ. Now my identity is I'm a person who can't run. I'm a person who has lost her hair. So that becomes your identity at that point, part of your identity. And what I'm saying is that after you have processed and integrated, found meaning, all of that then you work on this identity and restructuring instead of I'm a person who can't, instead it becomes I'm a person who used to, maybe, or I'm a person who loves this thing, but that doesn't do it. I'm a person who does do XYZ, something else. And so you're sort of restructuring this identity so that it is you're no longer being identified by your deficit or the thing that you are lacking or the thing that you are wanting, desiring. You're no longer feeling identified by a hole or a gap, but instead identifying as a person who loves that thing, identifies as a person who used to have that in my life, and identifies as a person who now has this new thing in my life, this new part of my identity that has happened because of this loss that I've had. So, of those 3 steps of honoring and grieving that loss, finding meaning, restructuring your identity, that last one is the one that takes the longest. And, remember when I said have patience with yourself with stage 1, really, really have patience with yourself for that 3rd one. It just takes a long, long time for some folks. And for some, it may be a lifelong process, which is totally fine, as long as you are moving in that direction of restructuring rather than feeling stuck or mired or trapped in identifying as a person with some kind of deficit. So I'm hoping that makes sense, sort of the difference between those ways of identifying yourself. And I really hope also that you are getting the message that it is important and okay for you to really validate yourself for those losses to those pieces or that piece of your identity, and to not be downplaying that, and instead to really elevate the importance of that in your mind so that you give it the due that it deserves because of all of the hours and years of contentment, satisfaction, happiness, excitement, whatever it is that it brought to your life. I really, really appreciate that you have watched this video and hope that you were able to get something out of it. Please don't forget to like and subscribe if you would like to be alerted to future videos that I put out. And I would love to see your comments down below, whether it's about this video or other topics that you'd like to hear more about. And whether we are interacting right here in YouTube land, over in Instagram, or over here in my office, I am just really excited to create something with you that brings clarity, connection, and hope. Until next time.